The weight of expectations settled like a tectonic plate beneath my bones, pressing me forward as if propelled by the silent, relentless force of reality. I stood at the kitchen table, the same one where my parents had once sipped tea, their laughter tinkling like water droplets against porcelain, while I'd hinted at dreams older than the ocean itself. Painting, they'd said, the realm of women, it's superficial, you'll never grasp the truth. Sound therapy, I countered, too bright, too desperate for them to hear the tremor of their own disdain vibrating through my nerves. They'd called it a farce, painful idlerhood, but idlerhood, it turned out, isn't the only path sculpted to endure. The irony, bitter as brine strung my tongue, was that my rejection had long been my compass. My family's words were not just denials, they were a liturgy of disgrace, each syllable a sack of salt hurling me back to the shore I'd trespassed on. Still I kept walking, bowing to no one but the ghosts of that room, hands shaking as I tried to recall the lab where the data began to align, not in the name of concept, but in the stubborn fact that help was measurable, science was quantifiable, and failure was currency I'd kept hoarded like inheritance. Years bled like sediment through my veins. By the time I finally stepped back into that same kitchen, the air had hardened to ice. My hands, once calloused from mixing chemicals, now cradled vibrations so foreign they felt like a betrayal. My company's name, Soundreach Industries, reduced to a whisper in the static of my memory. They'd mocked my thesis on myobiological resonance, reduced it to a punchline. Moonlight Mumbler, extending miraculous limits, worse still, they'd called my approach unrelated, childish, a distraction from your shared ambitions. I'd spent every morning pruning the sheep from this reputation, lest it crush the fragile soil of my future. But then the silence deepened, draining too sharply to drown the faintest echo of my father's old accountant whispers about my family's noisy legacy. That day I ignored them, but the ache clung like fog outside my window, insistent and unyielding. Revival was a slow unraveling. I returned to the lab not as a fool, but as someone who had traded skepticism for resolve. Chinese letter sounds were no less alien than anything in my head, yet it was there, thrumming beneath the surface, a murmur that no longer tormented me. I practiced, I recorded, I let the data speak, not my greatestness but the proof. When Soundreach offered to adopt me as a trainee, my heart clenched. Could this be redemption? I accepted only because I couldn't bear the choice. The building was older than my years, its bones groaning under the weight of expectation. When I settled in, the same old family dynamics unfolded, my mother's teasing, my father's impatience, my cousin's lazy shrug. Yet each interaction carried a different weight. They knew the sting of those past slights, yet also the respect now embedded deep within. So I followed the lead of Soundreach's founder, a man whose father was a fisherman who'd once claimed his life was spent counting limp nets, not stars. We sparred over methodology, how to translate deep-sea vibrations into measurable sonar data, how to calibrate resonance for emotional healers versus engineers. We argued, laughed at the absurdity, and somehow through it all we built something tangible, a sanctuary where pairs could coexist in silent communion, their breaths syncing with the hum of machinery and the pulse of something older than their bloodlines. Then came the moment they'd never imagined. The showcase was a void that would soon swallow light. Soundreach was presenting their innovation, a compact device that amplified subsonic frequencies to combat trauma, cackling with triumphant audacity. But the space was too small, too loud. The family, bundled torches and clutching books they'd skimmed through that morning, stood in the corner, their faces etched with a mix of intrigue and revulsion. My hands, still stained with mineral residue from diving, trembled. This was the theater of their worst fears incarnate, not failure but exposure. They would see the spectacle, their pride spat out like ash, yet they'd never let go. My dad, too, stood there, nostalgic for the old days, though his knuckles whitened around his cane. My mother arched a brow, unimpressed, but her gaze lingered a moment too long on the prototype, its sleek curves echoing the jagged memories clawing at my chest. I stepped forward, the floor slab beneath me cold as a confession, a beat, then the room held its breath, my voice flattened, a thread cutting through the wake of their reactions. They said I wanted to make the dark silent, I said, to hold it together. They laughed, the sharp, counterclockwise sound that cut through the room's white noise. My father sputtered, my brother dropped his crumpled science fair brochure. My mother held her nose, but I sensed something shift, a ripple beneath their panic. The prototype hummed, steady and small, a counterweight to their rage, but the absorption was slow, savage, a process that required patience none of them could muster. For a goddamn hour, they watched through blinds, shielding their eyes from the kaleidoscope I was building. When I finished, the silence fractured, a floorboard groaned, my mother rushed forward, her touch firm but uncontrolled. "Everyone," she began, voice cracking like breaking ice, "you think this changes things." I met her eyes, and for a heartbeat the floor trembled. Then, absurdly swift, the floorboards bowed, screaming. My father fell, grazing the knee of my older brother. My mother's tears fell unbidden onto my shoulder. They didn't offer forgiveness. Not now, not then. They'd spent a lifetime refusing to see the cracks in a mirror once reflected back at me. Yet there was a space in their gaze, a flicker of something close to gratitude, a recognition that the very tools they'd vilified could now undo the damage. They didn't applaud, they didn't hesitate, they didn't ask questions. And in that space gasped the air, thick with unspoken truths, how they'd once called me a waste of resources, how I'd called them a spectacle, now they just stared, broken. The truth crystallized then, not in words but in the cold light of knowing that algorithm I'd rigged, the data I'd harvested, and the silent symphony of resilience they'd dismissed as trivial, had instead become orchestration. They were right in a way they wouldn't admit it outright. Their squabbles, their jealousy, they'd all been part of creating the conditions where my new endeavor could bloom. The financials, the skepticism, all lay beneath, buried, waiting to surface. That night I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, the device humming behind me like a heartbeat. My mother's voice called out, soft and warm, pleading, I want to prove something." I thought of her, of all she'd known, her hands calloused from teaching lessons, her tears silenced by her own compromises. Then I remembered my father's voice, "Success isn't a destination, it's a choice." I closed my eyes. The sound therapy wasn't just about healing, it was about choice every single day. So I activated the device, its frequency a silent ultimatum. The data would rise, a reservoir of evidence, raw and unapologetic, and I would raise it. Then, with a decision so monumental, so violently mine, I'd hand it over. The show ended in disarray, but in the wreckage something shifted. My father muttered a disapproving joke, my mother exhaled a breath that carried an edge of something new. I left the city behind, lifting duffel bags heavier than myself, leaving my family's home transformed in ways I couldn't yet define. The blossoms that erupted beyond the threshold carried a scent of salt and rain, a metaphor for what had grown. Years later, standing by the bridge where their childhood home stood, I watched their children laugh beneath bridges long crushed by storms, their lives drafts for the very thing they'd refuted. Soundreach received a grant, their share immense, as they debated how to adapt. I didn't return for applause, but when they finally saw the signs, the financial reports cued, the community rallies, they listened again. I stood beside me not as avenger but as witness. The karma's ledger had written its final entry, someone had chosen, the cracks had been filled but not with force, with time. With the quiet certainty that you cannot rebuild what you've shattered without first embracing its emptiness. They left not as saviors, but as part of the story that now shaped the land itself. And yet when I looked back at them, a mother who taught me to love quietly, a father who once scoffed but now nodded in silent respect, they remembered what I'd escaped. Insignificance wasn't the point. The work, the unspoken loyalty, even the messy, beautiful rejection of disappointment, it lived in the seeds I'd planted, not as a replacement for what I'd lost, but as a seed for what might yet grow. The world needed not the ones who became dreamers at first, but the ones who walked through the cracks, rebuilding them one heartbeat at a time. And in that acceptance I found my own kind of triumph, a tapestry woven from tragedy, resilience, and the stubborn, radiant act of holding on to light when everything else had been extinguished.